The smell of smoke arrived before the sound, an acrid, profane odor, one that didn't belong to the calm of the Texan night. Jeremiah Sawyer opened his eyes, not to the pale gray of the dawn he'd known for 40 years, but to an orange, hungry glow dancing outside his window. The air was heavy, hot. The barn, the first he'd built with his own hands beside his late Martha, was already a black silhouette against a hell of flames. The sound came next, the crackle of dry wood surrendering shouts of orders in Spanish, and the thundering of anxious horses, their hooves punishing the ground Jeremiah called home. He rose, the bones of a 60-year-old man protesting, but his heart beat with the fury of a 20-year-old. Outside, under the sinister light of the fire, the figure of Captain Vargas of the Mexican Army stood out, impassive, mounted on his black horse. Beside him, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, was Tucker Coleman, his neighbor, the same man who, weeks before, had sat on his porch, offering a ridiculous sum for that land. "Hard times, Jeremiah," he'd said, with false concern. "A lone man can't hold on to such a large property. The Mexicans are eyeing everything." Jeremiah had sent him away with the politeness of a man of faith, but the firmness of one whose roots were deeply planted in the earth. Now he saw the price of his refusal. Tucker pointed to the main house, his lips moving, and Jeremiah didn't need to hear to know the words. Rebels, traitors, oh, nest of insurgents. It was the excuse they needed. His home, the place where he'd raised his children and buried his wife, transformed into a pretext for greed. As soldiers dragged furniture into the bonfire, memories assaulted him. Martha's face smiling as he nailed the last plank on the porch. The promise he'd made her on her deathbed. "This place will always be ours, my love." A piece of land where the Sawyer name means honor. And now, honor was being reduced to ashes by a greedy neighbor and an invading army. The soldiers broke down his door. They offered no resistance. Their violence was cold, bureaucratic. They dragged him out into the suffocating heat. Vargas glared down at him, contempt evident. "Your loyalty to Texas ends today, viejo." But then something changed. From the small guest cabin, already being licked by flames, a tall, broad figure emerged, coughing, soot streaking his face. He carried a long rifle, a Kentucky, which seemed an extension of his own arm. The Mexican soldiers, so confident moments before, hesitated. Captain Vargas narrowed his eyes, confusion clouding his arrogance. Tucker Coleman lost his smile. The man who had emerged from the smoke, his eyes burning with rage and breathlessness, was no ordinary peon. He was a name, a legend whispered at every campfire from San Antonio to Nacogdoches, Davy Crockett. Tucker Coleman had smiled, thinking the fire would solve everything. But the Texas desert has its own rules, and the primary one is never to wake a sleeping lion, especially when that lion is named Crockett. Crockett's presence altered the arithmetic of that night. Killing an old rancher was an act of war. Killing Davy Crockett would be igniting a powder trail that would set all of Texas ablaze. Captain Vargas, though arrogant, was not foolish. The execution was suspended, but the humiliation had only just begun. Instead of a bullet, Jeremiah and Crockett received the weight of chains. They were forced to watch the rest of the ranch burn, each collapsing beam a blow to Jeremiah's chest. Tucker Coleman, having recovered from his initial shock, approached with the confiscation document in hand, officially sanctioned by Vargas. The property now belongs to the Mexican government, managed by a loyal citizen, he said, his voice dripping with venom. "I will take good care of what's left." Vargas, with a dismissive gesture, ordered the two prisoners taken away. The march to the small town of Jasper was long and dusty. They were displayed in the main street like trophies. The great Tennessee hunter and the old pioneer, both covered in soot and dishonor. People watched from windows, from half-open doors, but no one dared intervene. Jeremiah saw in their eyes not condemnation, but fear, a feeling he now understood perfectly. It was a paralyzing fear, one that made good men fall silent in the face of injustice. The night before, he and Crockett had sat by the hearth, the same hearth, now a pile of rubble. Crockett, tired of Washington and the politics of small men, spoke of Texas with an almost religious fervor. "This here, Jeremiah," he'd said, gesturing to the vastness outside, "isn't just land. It's an idea. The idea that a man can build something with his own hands and call it his own, without asking permission from any king or general." Those words now echoed in the cold, damp cell where they were thrown. The injustice wasn't just the loss of his land, it was an attack on that idea. Jeremiah's motivation transmuted. It was no longer about the promise made to Martha, but about defending the very meaning of her sacrifice, the right of every Texan family to live free from the shadow of tyranny and betrayal. Vargas visited them occasionally, mocking the king of the wild frontier trapped in a cage. He believed humiliation would break them. That time and despair would do the work his bullets could not. He underestimated the fiber those men were made of. Jeremiah, in his silence, observed everything. He observed the dynamics among the soldiers, the way Vargas carried himself, Tucker Coleman's arrogance when he came to inspect his prizes. He saw the cracks in the enemy's armor. Crockett, in turn, did not succumb to despair. He told stories to the younger guards, tales of bears and congressmen, treating them not as enemies, but as men. Slowly, subtly, the ice of hostility began to melt. Vargas and Coleman believed that by locking them in a cold cell, they had broken their spirits. But they didn't know that in the silence of that prison, amidst the smell of mold and despair, the real hunt was just beginning to be planned. The action began not with a bang, but with a whisper. Crockett, with his rustic charm, won the sympathy of a young guard, a boy who had enlisted for adventure, not ideology. Through him, a message was sent, a small piece of torn cloth with a name and a symbol carved with a nail: Louisa Lawrence Reeves. Louisa was a widow. Her husband, a Texas Ranger, had been killed in an ambush a year prior, shortly after having a land dispute with Tucker Coleman. The death was officially attributed to bandits, but Louisa knew the truth in her bones. Jeremiah's name and the symbol of a lone star were enough. She became their eyes and ears in the outside world. With a cold determination, fueled by grief and a desire for justice, she began to act. She wasn't a trained spy, but she was smart, and more importantly, invisible. A grieving widow going into town for supplies didn't raise suspicion. She observed Tucker Coleman, who now strutted like the new lord of the valley. She saw his secret meetings, not just with Mexican officials, but with smugglers and mercenaries. He wasn't just a traitor. He was a vulture, building his own fiefdom. The first victory came in the form of an intercepted letter. In it, Coleman detailed to a corrupt official in San Antonio a plan to declare other ranches as hotbeds of rebellion, using the same tactic he'd used against Jeremiah. More importantly, the letter revealed he was siphoning off a portion of the taxes he collected in Mexico's name to buy weapons for his own men. He served no one but himself. Louisa didn't hand over the letter. Following Jeremiah's whispered instructions relayed by the young guard, she kept the proof. Instead, she began to spread rumors. seeds of distrust planted in the fertile soil of military paranoia. She spoke to merchants, to ranch hands, to soldiers, wives, weaving a web of whispers about a greedy American who thought himself smarter than the Mexican army. The plan was clear: attack not with force, but with confidence. Coleman's power depended entirely on Vargas's support. If that alliance was broken, he would be nothing. While Louisa worked from the outside, Jeremiah and Crockett prepared the ground from the inside. They didn't talk of escape, they talked of justice. Crockett taught Jeremiah to read men, to see beyond the uniform. Jeremiah, with his farmer's wisdom, taught Crockett about the patience of the earth, about waiting for the right moment for the harvest. Hope began to grow, not as a high flame, but as a hidden ember, burning slowly and steadily. While Tucker Coleman counted his silver coins in the comfort of the stolen ranch, a shadow moved through the town. A grieving woman, an old rancher, and an imprisoned legend. The powerful laughed, thinking the game was over. Little did they know that the silence was merely the sound of pieces moving on the board. The turn of the game occurred on a Tuesday market day. The town square was packed. Louisa, with the precision of a surgeon, made her final move. She approached a lieutenant loyal to Vargas, a man known for his rigidity and disdain for opportunistic civilians. Feigning desperation, she confessed to him that she'd overheard Coleman's henchmen boasting that their leader had a private arsenal, large enough so he wouldn't need the Mexicans anymore. She mentioned a hiding place in the old Sawyer barn, the same one that had been partially burned. The seed of doubt, watered by weeks of rumors, finally sprouted. The lieutenant, out of duty and suspicion, reported the conversation to Vargas. At first, the captain dismissed the information as the gossip of a bitter woman. But the idea of being betrayed by an American he himself had elevated to power was an intolerable offense to his honor. He led a small detachment to the ruins of the Sawyer Ranch, and there, under a hidden trapdoor, they found exactly what Louisa had said they would find: crates of rifles and ammunition, far more than a loyal citizen would need. Vargas's fury was volcanic. He returned to town and ordered Tucker Coleman dragged into the middle of the square. Then he ordered Jeremiah and Crockett brought from their cell. He wanted witnesses to his justice. Coleman, pale and confused, stammered denials, but the evidence was irrefutable. It was then that Jeremiah stepped forward. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the crowd silence. "Captain," he said, looking Vargas in the eye, unafraid, "this man did not offer you loyalty. He offered you what he thought you wanted to hear, in exchange for what he wanted to steal. He spoke not as an enemy, but as a man of honor, speaking to another. A man who betrays his own people for a handful of coins, Captain, will betray anyone, including you." The argument hit Vargas where it hurt: his soldiers' pride. Crockett, standing beside Jeremiah, sealed Coleman's fate with a few words, his voice resonating with moral authority. "A soldier's honor, Captain, is not measured by the land he conquers, but by the word he keeps. This man has no word. He has no honor." Faced with his own soldiers and the entire town, Vargas found himself at a crossroads. To maintain support for Coleman would be to appear weak and foolish. He made the only choice his pride allowed. With a sharp gesture, he snatched the deed from Coleman's hands and tore it in two. "Take this, traitor," he ordered his men. Then he turned to Jeremiah. For a moment, the two men, representatives of colliding worlds, stared at each other. Vargas threw the pieces of paper to the ground. "The land is yours, viejo," he said, his teeth clenched, "but don't forget that Mexico's eyes will remain upon it." He mounted his horse and rode away with his troops, leaving behind a traitor in chains and a town in silence. That afternoon, as the people saw Tucker Coleman being led away, there was no celebration. There was a deep silence, the silence of those who understand that justice in Texas sometimes comes not from the barrel of a rifle, but from the strength of a word spoken at the right time. Jeremiah Sawyer returned home, or rather, to what was left of it. The blackened walls and the skeleton of the barn were a monument to the night of fire, but he wasn't alone. The next day, the first neighbor arrived bringing lumber and hammers. Then, another and another. The town, which had previously hidden behind fear, now united by the courage Jeremiah had shown. Men, women, and even children came to help rebuild the Sawyer Ranch. The story of what happened in the square spread like wildfire, not as a tale of military victory, but of moral victory. Tucker Coleman disappeared. Some said he was executed by the Mexicans on the road. Others that he was abandoned in the desert to be judged by nature. His name became an inverse legend, a cautionary tale of how greed can consume a man entirely. His defeat wasn't celebrated, merely assimilated as a bitter lesson. Crockett stayed for a week. His large, strong hands, more accustomed to holding a rifle, now helped set new beams. One evening, sitting around an improvised fire where the porch used to be, he looked at Jeremiah. "You did more than save your land, friend," he said. "You reminded these people that a Texan's strength isn't in the gun he carries, but in the word he keeps and the community he builds." Jeremiah merely nodded, watching the flames dance. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like just a man who refused to let evil erase the memory of his wife and the future of his land. He won, not because he was stronger, but because his cause was just, his methods intelligent, and his faith unwavering. The rebuilding of the Sawyer Ranch became a symbol. Each plank nailed was an act of defiance. Each wall erected was an affirmation of resilience. The flag they raised, the end was not of any official nation, but a simple flag with a single star sewn by Louisa Reeves. It was the flag of that community, of that piece of land reclaimed not by hate, but by honor. The story taught everyone a profound truth about freedom. It is not guaranteed by armies or politicians, but cultivated day by day in the courage of one neighbor helping another, in the refusal to bow to injustice, no matter how great the power that enforces it. Years later, travelers passing by the Sawyer Ranch would say the place had a different peace. They didn't know of the night of fire and betrayal, but they felt it. They felt that here, an ordinary man, alongside a legend, had proven that Texas is not a piece of land, it's an oath. And oaths made under the desert sky, those not even time can erase. If stories like this, which rescue courage, honor, and the true spirit of struggle, move you, subscribe to our channel. Share this video with everyone who is proud of their roots and believes that justice always finds a way. And don't forget to comment from which city you are watching us, so we know how far the flame of Texan pride reaches.